Comment where you're watching from today, as we share the story of how an ordinary Tuesday at Beverly Hills High School became the day that would change one student's life forever, proving that sometimes heroes appear in the most unexpected places. The morning sun cast long shadows across the school's pristine campus as students filtered into their first period classes. Among them was Alex Chin, a 15-year-old sophomore who had mastered the art of being invisible. He walked with his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes fixed on the ground, trying to take up as little space as possible in the crowded hallways. Alex had good reason for wanting to stay unnoticed. For the past year, every day at school had become an exercise in survival, a careful dance of avoiding certain people and certain places. The bruises on his arms had finally faded, but the emotional wounds from daily torment were still fresh. What his teachers didn't know, what his parents couldn't understand, was that Alex's struggles went beyond typical teenage adjustment issues. The straight-A student who once loved school now dreaded each morning, carrying not just his backpack but the weight of constant fear and isolation. That particular morning seemed like any other as Alex slipped into his seat in Mr. Peterson's film studies class. It was his only sanctuary during the school day, the one class where his passion for movies and storytelling could momentarily make him forget his troubles. Today, they were supposed to have a guest speaker, though Alex hadn't paid much attention to the announcement. The Bullies, led by Brandon Walsh, the star quarterback, had their usual seats at the back of the class. Their whispered comments and stifled laughs had become such a constant backdrop to Alex's life that he barely registered them anymore. Or at least, that's what he told himself. What no one in the class knew was that Alex's documentary project, due at the end of the semester, was secretly about bullying. He had been carefully documenting his own experiences, though he had no intention of ever showing it to anyone. It was his way of coping, of trying to make sense of why some people chose to hurt others. The morning had started like any other, with Brandon and his friends making their usual comments just loud enough for Alex to hear but too quiet for the teacher to notice. "Hey, Chin, did your mom pack you dumplings again? The classroom already smells like your weird food." Alex kept his eyes forward, his hands clenched under his desk. He had learned that reacting only made things worse. Besides, he was used to the casual racism, the daily reminders that he didn't quite belong in this wealthy, predominantly white school. Mr. Peterson was writing something on the whiteboard about their guest speaker when the classroom door opened. The usual morning chatter died immediately as Jason Statham walked in, his presence commanding attention without effort. The action star was dressed casually in a black t-shirt and jeans, but there was no mistaking his powerful presence. "Class, as I mentioned last week, we're fortunate to have Mr. Statham join us today to discuss his experiences in the film industry," Mr. Peterson announced, his voice carrying a hint of nervous excitement. He'll be sharing insights about both acting and directing, and he's graciously agreed to review some of your documentary projects. The class erupted in excited whispers, but Alex felt his stomach drop. His documentary wasn't ready to be seen by anyone, let alone a famous actor. He slouched lower in his seat, hoping to remain unnoticed as usual. Statham began by sharing stories from his career, but it was his observant nature that would soon transform this ordinary class visit into something extraordinary. As he spoke, his trained eye noticed the subtle dynamics playing out in the classroom, the way certain students seemed to hold power over others, the barely concealed smirks, the tensed shoulders of those trying to make themselves smaller. When the time came for students to share their documentary ideas, Alex tried to make himself invisible, but Mr. Peterson had other plans. "Alex, why don't you tell Mr. Statham about your project? You've been working so diligently on it." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Alex could feel Brandon and his friends shifting in their seats behind him, could practically sense their mocking grins. But something in Statham's steady gaze gave him courage he didn't know he possessed. It's about social dynamics in high school," Alex began hesitantly, carefully avoiding the word bullying. "About how different groups interact and the impact they have on each other." "Sounds like a waste of time, just like everything else Chin does," Brandon's voice carried from the back of the room, followed by poorly concealed snickers from his friends. Mr. Peterson started to reprimand Brandon, but Statham held up a hand, his expression focused. "Actually, the action star said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that commanded attention. "I think Alex is onto something incredibly important. Social dynamics, power relationships, the impact of words and actions. These are themes that define some of the most powerful films ever made." The class fell silent as Statham moved to sit on the edge of Mr. Peterson's desk, his attention fully focused on Alex. "Tell me more about your approach. How are you capturing these dynamics?" For a moment, Alex hesitated. But something in Statham's expression, a mixture of genuine interest and understanding, gave him the courage to continue. "I've been documenting daily interactions. The small moments that most people don't notice but that shape how students feel about themselves and their place in the school." "Like what?" Statham pressed gently, though his expression suggested he already understood more than Alex had said. Alex swallowed hard, aware that the entire class was listening. Like when someone's lunch gets knocked off their table accidentally. Or when people make comments about someone's culture or appearance. The little things that add up over time. Brandon's voice cut through the tension again. "Sounds like someone's just bitter because they can't take a joke. Maybe if you weren't such a dash." "I think," Statham interrupted, his voice carrying a steel edge that made Brandon fall silent instantly, "that Alex has identified something crucial about human nature. About how power can be used to either build people up or tear them down." The action star stood up, his movement deliberate as he surveyed the classroom. "You know, in my films, I often play characters who fight against obvious villains. But in real life, the most damaging conflicts often happen in quiet ways, through words and small actions that chip away at someone's spirit." The silence in the classroom was absolute now, every student hanging on Statham's words. Even Brandon and his friends had lost their usual smirks, perhaps recognizing something in the action star's tone that suggested he understood exactly what was happening in their classroom. "Alex," Statham continued, "would you be willing to show me some of your footage after class? I think your project has the potential to make a real impact." Before Alex could respond, the bell rang, signaling the end of first period. As students began gathering their things, Statham's voice cut through the noise once more. "Brandon, I'd like you to stay for a moment as well. I think you might have some valuable insights to contribute to Alex's project." The look on Brandon's face suggested this wasn't the kind of attention he had hoped to receive from the famous visitor. As other students filed out, throwing curious glances over their shoulders, Alex remained in his seat, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else, something that felt surprisingly like hope. What happened next would not only change Alex's life but would transform the entire culture of Beverly Hills High School. But in that moment, as Jason Statham pulled up a chair to sit between Alex and Brandon, none of them could have predicted the extraordinary chain of events that was about to unfold. The action star's intervention was about to prove that sometimes the most heroic acts don't involve physical combat or dramatic confrontations, but rather the simple courage to stand up for someone who has lost the ability to stand up for themselves. The classroom felt different after the other students had left. Without the crowd, without the performative aspect of bullying that required an audience, Brandon's usual confidence seemed to waver. Alex remained in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of his desk, unsure whether to be terrified or hopeful about what was about to happen. Jason Statham pulled up a chair, positioning himself between the two boys but turning it backward, straddling it casually in a way that made the moment feel less formal, less threatening. The action star's presence, usually so intimidating on screen, now carried a different kind of intensity, focused, observant, and surprisingly gentle. "Let's watch some of your documentary, Alex," Statham said, his voice carrying no judgment, just genuine interest. "Show us what you've been capturing." Alex's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his laptop. He had never intended for anyone to see this footage, let alone its subjects. But something about Statham's steady presence gave him the courage to open the file. The first clip showed a seemingly innocent scene in the cafeteria. Brandon and his friends accidentally bumping into Alex's table, causing his lunch to spill. The camera, hidden in Alex's backpack, captured not just the incident but the aftermath, the quiet resignation as Alex cleaned up the mess, the stifled laughter from nearby tables, the teachers who saw but chose not to intervene. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he watched himself on screen. Without the energy of his friends, without the power that came from public performance, his actions looked different, smaller, meaner, less like teenage hijinks and more like calculated cruelty. The next clip showed a series of minor incidents. Whispered comments in the hallway, books knocked from Alex's hands, casual racist remarks disguised as jokes. But what made the footage powerful wasn't just the bullying, it was Alex's documentary technique. He had captured the faces of bystanders, the way they looked away, the silent complicity that allowed the behavior to continue. "Stop," Brandon suddenly said, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "I get it, okay? I'm the bad guy. Is that what you want everyone to see?" Statham leaned forward slightly. "What do you see when you watch this, Brandon? Really look at it. Not as someone defending their actions, but as someone watching a story unfold." The quarterback was quiet for a moment, his facade cracking slightly. I see someone trying to be funny, trying to impress their friends. But it doesn't look funny now. It looks..." He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. "It looks cruel," Statham finished for him. "It looks like someone using their power to make themselves feel bigger by making someone else feel smaller." The action star's voice wasn't accusatory. If anything, it carried a note of understanding that made his words even more impactful. "You know," Statham continued, "I've played a lot of tough guys in movies. But real toughness isn't about being able to intimidate others. It's about having the strength to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Even when it means admitting you've been wrong." Alex watched in amazement as Brandon's carefully constructed image began to crumble. The quarterback's shoulders slumped slightly, his eyes fixed on the screen where another clip was playing, this one showing him mocking Alex's accent during a class presentation. "I didn't..." Brandon started, then stopped. "I mean, I didn't think it was that bad. Everyone jokes around, right? It's just high school stuff." Statham shook his head slowly. "Is it? Look at Alex's face in that clip. Really look. That's not the face of someone experiencing just high school stuff. That's the face of someone being systematically broken down, day after day." The action star's words hung in the air as both boys absorbed their weight. Then, surprising everyone, Brandon spoke again, his voice smaller than before. "My dad? He always says I need to be tough, to show everyone I'm at the top. He says that's how the real world works." Something in Statham's expression shifted, a flash of understanding crossing his features. "I used to think that too," he admitted. "That being tough meant never showing weakness, never backing down. But you know what I've learned? Real strength is being able to lift others up instead of pushing them down." He turned to Alex, whose documentary was still playing silently on the laptop. "This footage isn't just about exposing bullying, it's about showing how power dynamics work in schools, in society. It's about how small acts of cruelty or kindness can shape someone's entire world." Alex nodded, finding his voice for the first time since they'd started watching. "I just wanted people to see, to understand what it feels like. Not just the big moments, but all the small ones that add up day after day." Brandon was quiet for a long moment, watching as another clip played, this one showing him and his friends surrounding Alex's locker, their bodies forming a barrier of intimidation while they made comments about his family, his culture, his right to be at the school. "I look like such a..." Brandon's voice cracked slightly. "This isn't who I want to be. But I don't know how to be different. Everyone expects me to be this person." Statham leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's the thing about expectations, they can trap us into being someone we're not. But they can also inspire us to be better than we are. The choice is yours." The action star stood up, moving to the window where the morning sun was streaming in. "You both have power, you know. Brandon, you have the power that comes from social status, from being at the top of the high school hierarchy. Alex, you have the power that comes from truth-telling, from having the courage to document what others want to ignore." He turned back to face them. "The question is, what are you going to do with that power?" The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected sound, Brandon clearing his throat. I want to help with the documentary," he said, his voice uncertain but sincere. "Not to make myself look better, but to show how things can change. How people can change." Alex looked up, startled by the offer. Statham watched the interaction carefully, seeing the first tentative bridge being built between bully and victim. "That's a start," the action star said quietly. "But it's not enough just to document change, you have to be that change. Both of you have the opportunity to transform not just your own relationship, but the entire culture of this school." He pulled out his phone, checking the time. "I'm supposed to be visiting other classes today, but I think this is more important. What if we spent the next hour really talking about how to make that transformation happen?" What followed was a conversation that would change not just two students' lives, but the entire atmosphere of Beverly Hills High School. Brandon began to open up about the pressure he felt to maintain his tough guy image, about his father's expectations, about his own insecurities that he masked with aggression. Alex shared more than just his footage. He shared his dreams of becoming a filmmaker, his love for storytelling, his desire to use his art to make people see the world differently. As they talked, guided by Statham's thoughtful questions and insights, something began to shift in the dynamic between them. The action star didn't just listen. He shared his own experiences of being bullied as a young athlete, of learning to channel his energy into positive goals, of discovering that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than pushing them down. By the time the second period bell rang, something extraordinary had happened in that quiet classroom. The seeds of change had been planted, though none of them could have predicted just how far those changes would reach. As they prepared to leave, Statham had one final message for both boys. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the power of moments like these. "What happens next depends on both of you. But remember, sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about dramatic confrontations or big gestures. Sometimes they're about the quiet courage it takes to change, to forgive, to become something better than what we were." The day was far from over, and the story was about to take turns that none of them could have anticipated. But in that moment, as Brandon awkwardly extended his hand to Alex, and Alex hesitantly shook it, something fundamental had shifted. The walls of silence that had protected bullying behavior were beginning to crumble, and in their place, something new and hopeful was starting to grow. News of what had happened in Mr. Peterson's film studies class spread through Beverly Hills High School like wildfire. By lunchtime, the story had taken on almost mythical proportions, with different versions circulating through the cafeteria. But what happened next would prove even more remarkable than the rumors suggested. Brandon Walsh, the quarterback who had spent years carefully cultivating his image as the school's untouchable alpha, did something unprecedented. He walked into the cafeteria, spotted Alex Chin sitting alone at his usual corner table, and sat down across from him. The usual lunchtime chatter died down as students noticed this breach in the school's rigid social hierarchy. Brandon's fellow football players, seated at their traditional table, looked on in confusion. Some even started to get up, assuming their leader was about to initiate some new form of torment. But Brandon's next actions left them frozen in place. He pulled out his lunch and began eating, talking to Alex in a normal, friendly way. Even more surprisingly, he was listening as Alex spoke, nodding and engaging in what appeared to be a genuine conversation. Jason Statham, who had been invited to join the faculty for lunch in the teacher's lounge, watched this scene unfold through the cafeteria windows. The action star had planned to spend just one day at the school, but something about the situation had compelled him to accept the principal's invitation to stay for the entire week. What he witnessed in that lunchroom was the beginning of a transformation. As Brandon and Alex continued their unlikely lunch meeting, other students began to drift over. First came a few of the braver souls, those who had always wanted to challenge the status quo but never had the courage. Then, gradually, even some of Brandon's usual crowd joined them. The conversation that developed wasn't just about bullying or reconciliation, it was about Alex's documentary project. Brandon, to everyone's surprise, was actively contributing ideas about how to make it more impactful, suggesting ways to show not just the problem of bullying but the possibility of change. "What if," Brandon suggested, his voice carrying across the now quiet cafeteria, "we showed both sides? Not to excuse the bullying, but to help people understand how these patterns start, how they continue, and how they can be broken. Alex nodded thoughtfully, pulling out his laptop to show some of the footage he'd captured. Students gathered around, many seeing themselves on screen for the first time. Not just the bullies and the bullied, but the bystanders, those whose silence had allowed the behavior to continue. Statham, watching from the doorway, saw something powerful happening. This wasn't just about two students finding common ground, it was about an entire school community beginning to confront its own culture of silence and complicity. The action star's presence had become more than just a celebrity visit. He had become a catalyst for change, but more importantly, he was there to witness and support the students as they began the difficult work of transforming their school culture. During afternoon classes, something else unexpected happened. Students began approaching Alex, asking to share their own stories for the documentary. It wasn't just victims of bullying who wanted to speak, it was former bullies, bystanders, and even teachers who had struggled with how to address the problem. Brandon's influence proved crucial in these developments. As one of the school's most popular students, his visible friendship with Alex sent a powerful message. But more than that, his willingness to acknowledge and discuss his past behavior opened the door for others to do the same. Statham spent the afternoon sitting in on various classes, not as a celebrity guest but as an observer and occasional contributor to discussions about school culture, respect, and the power of choice. His presence served as a reminder that strength doesn't have to mean dominance, that true power comes from how we treat others. After school, something even more remarkable occurred. Brandon organized an impromptu meeting in the gymnasium, inviting anyone who wanted to be part of changing the school's culture. To everyone's surprise, nearly half the student body showed up. Alex set up his camera to document the meeting, but this time he wasn't hiding it. With Statham's encouragement, he had begun to see his documentary not just as an exposé of bullying, but as a chronicle of transformation. "Look," Brandon addressed the gathered students, his voice echoing in the gymnasium, "I know I've been part of the problem. For years, I thought being strong meant making others feel weak. I was wrong. And I'm not the only one." One by one, other students began to speak up. Athletes admitted to bullying behavior they now regretted. Students who had been bullied shared their experiences. Bystanders acknowledged their role in allowing the behavior to continue. Statham, standing quietly at the back of the gym, watched as the conversation evolved from confession to action. Students began proposing concrete ways to change the school's culture: mentor programs, support groups, new policies for addressing bullying behavior. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Brandon turned to Alex and publicly apologized for every instance of bullying, every racist comment, every moment of intentional cruelty. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and the impact on the assembled students was profound. "I can't take back what I did," Brandon said, his voice carrying to every corner of the gym. "But I can try to make it right. Not just with Alex, but with everyone I've hurt. And I'm asking all of you to join me in making the school a place where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Students began signing up for various initiatives, forming committees, and sharing their own ideas for positive change. The energy in the gymnasium was electric. This wasn't just talk, this was the beginning of real action. As the meeting continued, Statham pulled Alex aside for a quiet conversation. "Your documentary isn't just about bullying anymore," he observed. "It's about transformation, about the possibility of change, about the power of forgiveness and redemption." Alex nodded, his camera still rolling to capture the unprecedented scene in the gymnasium. "I never thought it would turn out like this," he admitted. "I thought I was just documenting my own isolation, my own pain. But now you're documenting hope," Statham finished for him. And that's a much more powerful story. The action star had seen many scripts in his career, had played many roles, but what was unfolding in this high school gymnasium was better than any Hollywood ending. This was real change happening in real time, sparked by one moment of intervention but carried forward by the students themselves. As the day drew to a close, the impact of what had happened was still rippling through the school community. Parents began receiving calls and texts from their children, sharing the events of the day. Teachers met in impromptu groups, discussing how to support and sustain the changes that were beginning to take shape. But for Alex and Brandon, the day's most significant moment was yet to come. As they packed up their things in the gymnasium, Brandon turned to his former victim with a question that would take their story in yet another unexpected direction. "You know," he said, somewhat hesitantly, "my dad's hosting a big charity event this weekend. A lot of influential people will be there. What if we showed them some of your documentary? Maybe we could get support for taking this message beyond just our school." The suggestion revealed how far Brandon had come in just one day, from someone who used his influence to intimidate to someone looking to use that same influence for positive change. Statham, overhearing the conversation, saw an opportunity to expand the impact of what had started in one classroom. "I might know some people who could help with that," he offered. "People in the industry who care about these issues and have the resources to make a difference." As they discussed the possibilities, it became clear that what had begun as one student's secret documentation of his own bullying was evolving into something much larger, a movement that could potentially impact schools across the country. The day was ending, but the story was far from over. What had started with one action star's intervention in one classroom had sparked a transformation that was only beginning to unfold. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, as students worked to turn their commitments into lasting change. But for now, as the last students filed out of the gymnasium, there was a palpable sense of hope in the air. Something had shifted in the culture of Beverly Hills High School, and that shift was just the beginning of an even more remarkable journey. 3 months after Jason Statham's unexpected intervention at Beverly Hills High School, the school's auditorium was filled to capacity. Students, parents, teachers, and community leaders had gathered for the premiere of Alex Chen's documentary, now titled "Breaking the Cycle: A Story of Change." The film had evolved far beyond its original scope. What had started as one student's private documentation of bullying had become a powerful story of transformation, featuring interviews with students from all social circles, including both victims and former bullies who had chosen to change. In the front row, Alex sat between his parents, who were seeing the full documentary for the first time. Beside them sat Brandon Walsh and his father, their presence a testament to how much had changed. Jason Statham, who had flown in specifically for this event, sat quietly in the back, preferring to let the students take center stage. As the lights dimmed and the film began, the audience watched in rapt attention. The opening sequence showed the school as it had been, the subtle hierarchies, the casual cruelty, the silent suffering of those who didn't fit in. But then it shifted, showing the moment everything began to change. The footage from that first day, when Statham had intervened, was powerful in its simplicity. The action star hadn't used physical force or dramatic confrontation. He had simply created a space for truth to be spoken and heard. The transformation that followed was even more remarkable. The documentary showed how Brandon's public apology in the gymnasium had sparked a wave of similar conversations throughout the school. Students who had never spoken to each other were suddenly engaging in honest discussions about bullying, racism, and the power of words. But the film didn't shy away from the challenges. It showed the initial skepticism from some students, the resistance from those who benefited from the old system, the difficult conversations that had to happen before real change could take root. One of the most powerful segments featured Brandon's father, a successful businessman who had initially dismissed the anti-bullying initiative as oversensitivity. The camera captured his gradual understanding as he watched his son transform from a bully into a leader for positive change. "I always taught Brandon that strength meant dominance," his father admitted on screen. "I was wrong. Real strength is what he's showing now, the courage to admit mistakes, to change, to help others do the same." The documentary also highlighted the concrete changes that had taken place at Beverly Hills High. The mentorship program, initiated by Brandon and supported by other former bullies, paired upperclassmen with incoming freshmen to create a more welcoming environment. The Cultural Awareness Club, started by Alex, had become one of the school's most popular organizations. But perhaps the most powerful moments were the small ones. Shots of students from different social groups sitting together at lunch, former victims now walking the halls with confidence, former bullies using their influence to protect rather than intimidate. As the film progressed, it became clear that this wasn't just a story about bullying, it was about the possibility of transformation, about the power of one person's choice to make a difference, about the ripple effects of kindness and understanding. The audience watched as the documentary showed how the changes at Beverly Hills High had begun to influence other schools. Delegations from neighboring districts had visited to learn about the anti-bullying initiatives. Alex and Brandon had been invited to speak at educational conferences, sharing their story of transformation. Jason Statham appeared only briefly in the film, in footage from that first day. His role had been that of a catalyst, but the real heroes were the students themselves, those who had found the courage to change, to forgive, to create something better than what had existed before. The film concluded with a series of interviews with students reflecting on the changes they had witnessed and participated in. Their words were powerful in their simplicity. "I used to think being strong meant making others feel weak. Now I know real strength is about lifting others up. I never thought I could make a difference. But when you start speaking up, other people find their voices too. It's not just about stopping bullying, it's about creating a community where everyone feels valued and respected." As the credits rolled, the auditorium erupted in applause. But what happened next would demonstrate just how far-reaching the impact of this transformation would be. The school principal took the stage to make an announcement. Major educational organizations had expressed interest in using the documentary as a training tool for schools across the country. A foundation had offered funding to help expand the anti-bullying initiatives to other districts. But the most meaningful moment came when Brandon and Alex took the stage together. Former bully and victim, now partners in creating positive change, they embodied the possibility of transformation that their documentary celebrated. When Mr. Statham first intervened that day in film class, Alex began, his voice steady and confident. "I thought he was just going to stop one instance of bullying. But he did something much more important. He showed us that change is possible, that it's never too late to choose a different path." Brandon stepped forward then, his presence now protective rather than intimidating. "This documentary isn't just about what happened at our school," he added. "It's about what can happen at any school when people have the courage to speak up, to listen, to change." From his seat in the back of the auditorium, Statham watched with quiet satisfaction. His intervention had provided the spark, but the students had created the fire of change themselves. They had transformed their story from one of victim and bully into one of hope and possibility. After the presentation, as people mingled in the lobby, sharing their reactions and committing to supporting the anti-bullying initiatives, Statham finally made his way to the front. He found Alex and Brandon surrounded by well-wishers, handling their moment in the spotlight with grace and humility. "You've created something remarkable here," he told them quietly. "Not just the documentary, but the change it represents. This is going to help a lot of people." Alex smiled, looking more confident than he had that first day in film class. "Thank you for showing us it was possible. For giving us the courage to speak up." Brandon nodded in agreement. "You know, I always thought heroes were about fighting and winning. But you showed us that real heroism is about having the courage to change, to make things right." As the evening drew to a close, the impact of what had been accomplished was clear. A school had been transformed. Lives had been changed. A movement had been launched that would continue to grow and influence others. But perhaps the most powerful testament to the change was in the small moments, the way students from different groups lingered together in the lobby, sharing stories and making plans for future projects. The way former victims now walked with confidence, and former bullies used their influence to protect and support others. The story of Beverly Hills High School had become more than just a tale of bullying and intervention. It had become a blueprint for transformation, a reminder that change is possible when people have the courage to speak up, to listen, to become something better than they were before. As Statham prepared to leave, he overheard a conversation between two freshmen who had just watched the documentary. One was asking the other what they thought the most important lesson was. The response captured the essence of everything that had happened. "I think it's that we all have the power to change things. We just need the courage to try." The action star smiled to himself as he walked out into the evening air. In all his movies, he had played heroes who saved the day through physical prowess and dramatic action. But sometimes the most powerful acts of heroism happen quietly, in the moments when one person chooses to stand up and say, "This isn't right," and others find the courage to listen and change. The story of Alex, Brandon, and the transformation of Beverly Hills High School would continue to inspire others long after that evening. But its real power lay not in the grand gestures or public recognition, but in the daily choices of students who had learned that every person has the power to make a difference, that every act of kindness or cruelty creates ripples that affect others, and that it's never too late to choose a better path.